Let's talk about the current distribution model, because it's essentially done by Eskom and municipalities. We don't have any private players in distribution in electricity as yet.
If we look at South Africa, we still have a predominant vertical integrated industry with Eskom dominating the market. You have the generation component, the transmission, and quite a substantial portion of the distribution under the control of Eskom. And then you have some odd 180 municipalities in South Africa also distributing electricity to end customers. Comparing that with where the whole world is going, you find an unbundling of the industry. Even if you compare it with our neighbours, Nigeria is going through quite an extensive unbundling of the market, where you're really inviting private players into the market ultimately. Although the picture in South Africa was for the first phase not to have it unbundled to that level, but surely to lay the foundation for the future.
Do you think that we're ever going to see the unbundling of this, given the fact that there is fear that Eskom, of course, being the monopoly at this point in time, is very strategic from a country perspective, and if we start seeing private players coming to the fore, it could alter the competitive environment, and the pricing structure is what people are really worried about?
We must never underestimate the potential strategic implications of an unbundling. However, I'm one of the believers that say, if you do not bring in more players into the industry, you will always place the whole burden on government. So if there's funding shortfall, you'll have to go to the principal, who happen to be government in this case. So my personal contention is that we should see a level of unbundling of the distribution industry in South Africa, and specifically the market. We need to structure the market so that it becomes attractive to investors to come into this sector, but also for future generation capacity to really effectively operate and play in the market.
Speaking to some CEOs on this desk, it seems that there is a lot of fear and worry with regards to generating electricity, because they're not really sure in terms of what the regulatory structure is going to look like going forward, and they're still waiting on this. Tongaat Hewlett being an example. They've been talking about generating electricity for a few years now, and they're still waiting for regulatory reform. When do you think this is going to happen?
Before we answer that question, perhaps we should just have a brief look at that challenge. I can understand if you want to put up a power plant today and you want to generate, and the buyer also happen to be the person that's going to pay you and dispatch you, that there are challenges in this market. So in other words, in the example that you've given, they will be competing in a certain way with Eskom. And therefore there is a need to create this independence in the market. My personal view, if a person considers the work that the Department of Energy is doing around it, and they are sincere and unbundling it and getting it right. But I would venture to say today that we're at least 5 to 10 years away from that position.
Would you say that we need private independent power producers in the country? Or do you think we need independent power distribution in the country? Do we need both?
Well, the first point is competition has never been bad. Competition forces efficiency and effectiveness. It also, as I indicated already, takes off the burden of government to feed the full bill at the end of the day. So from that perspective, I'm of the opinion that competition can only be good. You need it in the generation side, that's where the big opportunity is, and you need it in the distribution end. If you really want to get service delivery correct and improved, then I suggest you introduce competition. We must just remember that the wires type of business will always be a monopoly business. So therefore you need to tightly regulate it. So to get it right, you also require tight regulation. So our regulator must then have the competence, because we must keep in mind that the regulator signals the confidence to an investor that I will get my return on my investment.
And the confidence is not there as yet.
At this point in time, we're not regulating to the level that we should be regulating.
Coal-fired power plants, we know that we're busy building some coal-fired power stations. We're also going to be embarking on nuclear generation, despite the fact that this is now the opposite in terms of what's happening on a global level. Give us an indication of where independent power producers would want to come in at this point in time, because it seems that government has got all bases covered at this point with regards to future generation and the big capex spend.
Yeah. If we look at the total industry, the electricity supply industry in South Africa, it is true that there is a plan in place to address the generation side and to avoid the 2008 blackouts that we had. And we need to complement government and Eskom and the big players in that space. My view is that your independent power producers would like to come in on the generation side, but perhaps consider the alternative fuel options in it. But there is a fundamental that we need to address. and that it is no good you having the generation upstream sorted out, and you've got the transmission grid sorted out, but on the distribution end, the so-called last kilometer to the end customer is falling apart. Now, as we speak today, the backlog on maintenance, refurbishment and strengthening sits at 27.4 billion rand on a 2008 study that we did, and it's growing by 2.5 billion rand per annum. Now, that's a few bucks that we require to get that end right. So you can't just focus on the generation, and I submit that we need in South Africa to have a look at an holistic industry solution and fix the total value chain, and not just one component of it.
Okay, well, this is, you said 27.4 billion rand in terms
That's
of backlog in investment with regards to maintenance and the distribution side. Do you think that it's grown, or do you think that it's actually come down, given the fact that consumers are paying far more for electricity since the blackouts that we incurred in 2008? Has that money just solely, and you're sitting with a big smile, has that money solely gone into funding the new coal-fired power plants?
I think we must just consider there's a component of the tariff which is obviously that's going to Eskom, which Eskom will use in their generation, transmission and distribution. But for most of the customers, of the 9.2 million customers in South Africa, the majority of them actually is supplied by municipalities. And when we talk about the infrastructure, we must acknowledge there are pockets of good performance. However, the question that you've asked, is it getting better or it's getting worse? It's getting worse. I think the outages and the number of outages, we even have some of our bigger suppliers with an average of 135 unplanned outages per month. Now, surely that can't be a signal of having a business under control.